Yeah, Reform UK's even deputy leader has just been speaking in Westminster about how councils around the country will be slashing wasteful spending. So let's cross live now to our political correspondent Olivia Utley, who I believe is with Richard Tice. Olivia, over to you. Good morning, or good afternoon even.
This important interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your money and your identity. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code here to get ExpressVPN right now and save up to 73% on annual plans today. Right, let's get back into it.
Good afternoon. Yes, Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform, has been giving the press an update on how the Doge-style savings are going, which his party would plan to implement from local government upwards. And I'm joined by Richard Tice. So, Richard, firstly, I mean, we're all talking about these immigration reforms, of course. Our viewers have just been listening to Mark White talk about what they would entail. GB News viewers, on the whole, quite like the sound of them. Would reform in the Commons vote for those proposals tabled by Shabana Mahmood?
Well, I think the Home Secretary is now sort of adopting the language and ideas that we've essentially given her. But the question is that, what proposals actually will come forwards. She might actually need our votes, because I'm not sure she's going to get the support of her own backbenchers behind her, all starting to call her all sorts of strange names. Look, at the end of the day, people want illegal immigration stopped. They want legal immigration essentially frozen so that we can catch up and look after British citizens. And look, we wish her well. Whether or not she can actually get anything done, we doubt, because you have to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, you have to repeal the Human Rights Act, otherwise you're just subject to the human rights lawyers making off like bandits and preventing deportations and the introduction of a proper immigration policy.
You say the Home Secretary is speaking the language of reform. You've had a lot of defections to reform recently. If Shabana Mahmood wanted to join reform, would you have her?
Well, obviously she'd have to go through the usual vetting process, but people have got to believe in our principles and our values. That's the key thing, and I think that's why people are coming over to us. They're furious about what's happening to our country, and look at the number of council by-elections we're winning. In fact, just in my constituency last Thursday, we had our record ever reform win at almost 66% of the vote. So people want more reform, not less reform.
Sounds like an invitation to Shabana Mahmood to me. Now, you talked today about the Doge-style savings you're making across government. The bottom line is, though, that your voters want you to cut council tax. Are you going to do that?
Well, the first thing we've announced today is we've saved both current and future well over £300 million of savings, with a lot more to come. And we've talked also about the potential savings by managing the local government pension scheme better to reduce the costs of that. And that could help enormously. And then also I've talked at length about SEND and special educational needs and disabilities, which we all want to be done really well for the most needy children needing the greatest provision. But the truth is that I've been asked by experts to highlight the failings of SEND, the overdiagnosis of children with supposed neurodiverse needs, over-medication. You don't need annual educational health and care plans. Billions of pounds are being misspent, badly spent, and we can do this so much better. And do you know who's suffering the most from it? Children, who are getting the worst outcomes, poorer outcomes. And so we're saying, and likewise, the rip-off of the taxi firms taking EHCP children to schools, all of this stuff is wrong, and the children are receiving worse outcomes as a result.
You suggest as well that parents are gaming the system, trying to get money out of the system by diagnosing their children with disabilities. That's a pretty big claim. Can you quickly explain what you mean by that?
Yes, look, the reality is that for example, there's lots of middle-class parents now using solicitors to fill out EHCP application forms in order to, because if you're in an independent school and you've got an EHCP, guess what? You get no VAT. What the government should do is scrap their ridiculous VAT on independent school fees so that more people go to independent schools to ease pressure off the state system. Likewise elsewhere, if you get an EHCP, then the parents can qualify for a PIP, which means they can qualify for a motability car. And we've got situations where parents, they've got a motability car, but they're still demanding a taxi to take the child to school. This is wrong. And do you know what? Children are better off being taken to school either by parents or friends and with other school friends. That's how you get better outcomes, and also how we save hundreds of millions, if not billions, for council taxpayers. That requires a change in legislation. We said what the government should do is don't kick the can down the road, try some changes on a cross-party basis from next April, and then we can start to work out the best ways to essentially to help those genuinely in need, the most in need, but also not to wrongly label children who don't need labelling, who then think there's something wrong with me, when there isn't. They're just great children with different thoughts and excitements, and that's all part of being a child.
Thank you very much, Richard Tice. That's Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform. No clear promise there to cut council tax, but lots of ideas about how to make savings. I'm sure we'll hear more from Reform on this very soon. For now, back to you in the studio.
Every time you're online, your money and your identity are at risk. Scams now make up nearly 40% of all crime in the UK. That's thousands of attacks every single day. In Britain, someone has their identity stolen every 2 minutes, leaving victims with wrecked finances and years of stress. The threat is real, and you could be next. ExpressVPN is your shield against criminals. It locks down your devices, hiding your personal information and financial details from hackers, scammers, and anyone else looking to exploit you. So whether you're checking your bank, shopping, or just browsing, ExpressVPN makes you invisible to prying eyes trying to steal your money and your identity. ExpressVPN shields your data with military-grade AES 256 encryption. That's the same standard trusted by the US government to guard classified information. This is the highest level of online security you can get. So don't wait for disaster. Secure up to 14 devices at once and get powerful password protection. Real support is available 24/7 because cybercrime never sleeps. Save up to 73% on annual plans today. Every moment you hesitate is another moment you're exposed. Protect your money and protect your identity. Get ExpressVPN right now.
It's a bit wet and a bit soft because the establishment referee hasn't blown it up properly. But we're pushing on. And already after just 12 minutes, we're in the lead. And it's fair to say that the opposition can't quite believe it. Yes, we've had a couple of slips on the soggy pitch. We've had a couple of missed tackles. But actually, we're leading well. In fact, it's a high-scoring game so far. We've scored 55, and our opponents, a slightly strange coalition of Labour and the Conservatives, they've scored 29. And we've peaked last week. Well, I hope we haven't peaked, but we've made great progress with a record win just last Thursday, where we secured almost 66% of the vote in a council by-election in my constituency of Boston and Skegness. Not that I'm biased. But I think that's a sign that we appreciate the enormous interest from the enthusiastic press who've been baying from the sidelines of the pitch, led by those political gurus, Gary Lineker and Gary Neville. But actually, you can see how this scrutiny, this accountability, we've got no problems with that. We welcome it, as Stephen indicated earlier. We said when we campaigned for these elections that we would stand on a platform of saving money, cutting waste, and identifying major issues. And today I'm going to be pretty candid with you. About 1 in 5 of all councils, not ours, but of all councils, are in extreme financial support. Within 4 or 5 years, almost 50% of councils will be basically bankrupt, where essentially their deficits are greater than their reserves. The direction of travel is very bad indeed. It doesn't need to be this way, but fundamental change is required. And what we're identifying is, yes, we can save money in numerous areas, but there are other areas where actually there is a change of regulations and statutes that are required. And if this government doesn't do it, then a reform government, after the next general election, will urgently bring in major reforms to local government in order to achieve this. Now, you recall a couple of months ago, I gave a press conference about what we've identified with regard to the local government pension schemes, where we have discovered, nobody else had previously, significant overcharging to a factor of at least 5, and massive underperformance. And I think it's fair to say since then, the investment management industry is a little bit grumpy with me. That's fine. But also, the numbers, the underperformance to the 5 years to March 25 are even worse than we feared. Just in our councils alone, the underperformance relative to the benchmark that I set, £2 billion every year for the last 5 years. This is the big one. This is the most significant sum of money of everything that we are looking at just across our councils. And that's why we're taking it incredibly seriously. We've also got genuine concerns about what's going on with some of the consultants and also the valuers, the people doing the actuarial valuations. Frankly, they should be done every year, not every 3 years. But what we've discovered is a concern, a genuine concern, that some of these valuers are deliberately overvaluing the future liabilities and undervaluing the future assets in order to keep the employer contributions unnecessarily high. The cynic might say, that's very nice, that keeps the assets under management higher, that keeps the fees higher. So we're going to keep challenging and keep pushing, because if we get the employer contributions right, and when we discover that in one council that's adopted a very similar policy to our plans, their employer contributions now are almost zero. And when we discover that another very well-run council pension fund, I talked about getting fees down to 10, 11 basis points, to discover that actually one is doing better that down at 4 or 5, why on earth the investment management industry thinks it's acceptable to justify 50 basis points or half of 1%, that beats me. So pensions is a huge one, and we are addressing that very, very seriously. Now, the second item I want to cover is the savings that we've got stuck into. And some of you have reported this morning, we've identified and starting to achieve savings of well over £300 million that we've identified and secured so far. Now, some of those are into the future, some of them are quite long, and I personally have been involved in a couple of those negotiations. We said we didn't accept one of the waste contracts that was proposed, despite the recommendations from officers, and a few weeks later we've secured a long-term reduction of over £70 million. Being a real estate guy, I'm taking particular interest in some of the property stuff, and when our councillors are being essentially sort of gently bullied by officers to say you've got to do this property deal, which could cost 30, 40, 50 million quid, and they gave me a buzz and I rushed up to look at it, I said under no circumstances should you do that deal. That's the sort of real world, real experience that we are bringing to this space. Whether it's IT contracts that don't need to have 11-year notice periods when you could achieve 3 to 6 month notice periods and the like. We're making major renegotiations as contracts come up for renewal. Potholes are incredibly important. 136,000 potholes later, we're very pleased with progress. And that has a real impact, for example, on reducing the claims that councils are starting to pay. So we're making good progress, but there's a huge amount more to do. Some councils have resurfaced or repatched 500,000 square metres of roads and paths. So we are making significant progress. And we're discovering stuff all the time. When we discover that some charities and community interest companies almost have like a free range as to draw down under some framework agreement, 500,000 here, 1 million there, with almost no accountability, no approval process, no responsibility, we're saying, what's going on? Stop. Which brings you on to a thing called delegated powers. We're finding some officers, they have these large delegated powers, £1 million plus, and they sort of view councillors as like cherries on the cake, just be sort of waved at and patted on the head occasionally. That is not acceptable. We are negotiating hard on behalf of the taxpayer. And the third key item I want to raise this morning is the really important and difficult issue of SEND, special educational needs and disabilities for children. This is actually, it goes to the core of who we are. And actually, for me, it's also quite personal. A very dear friend of mine who had not one but two children in a wheelchair, the struggles that he had and his wife to secure the provision that they obviously needed was extraordinary. And in my own extended family, young lad at primary school, told he would need a bit of extra support, and he got that at school. He was never going to be an Oxbridge candidate. Didn't go to uni, done brilliantly, fantastic job, doing well. To be told by a psychologist in your early 20s that you've got a problem, that you're labelled, that you need to take medication, is frankly, and that medication might be for the long term. I think that's outrageous. And what is going on is that SEND is in crisis. And I've been specifically asked by council officers, directors of services, to tell it as it is. We all want the very best provision for the most deserving. I reiterate that absolutely. But there is a crisis of overdiagnosis of children with neurodiverse issues. And you can come up with all sorts of new labels. But when you hear that EHCPs, educational health and care plans, are 3 times the level they were 8 to 10 years ago, and that they're increasing in many councils now by between 8 to 10% a year, you say, hang on, our beloved children, they are not 10% more in need every single year. Basic common sense tells you that. So you say, what is going on? What is going on here with this overdiagnosis? And there's a whole bunch of factors. But the state and all of us, we're all suffering. In a sense, we're being sort of, in inverted commas, we've been given a bad deal. But the people who suffer the most are the children. Since the Children and Families Act 2014, well-intentioned, we've no doubt, outcomes have got worse, in particular for the most needy. Think about that. 10 billion a year and counting and rising, and your outcomes are getting worse. And you get a situation where, in a sense, you've got taxi firms making off like bandits. I discovered a taxi firm, not in one of our councils, with a 4.2 million contract and only 10 drivers, apparently. Nice work if you can get it. Or they're not telling the truth. When you've got educational therapists and psychologists, they're doing so much reviews and assessments and reports, they actually haven't got time to do the intervention and the thought and the support and the therapy. That's coming from the Association of Directors of Children's Services. You know, this is seriously going wrong.